One wonders if War and Peace would have been as highly acclaimed as it was had it been published under its original title, War, What Is It Good For?
What?
Yeah, Mr. Lippman. It was his mistress who insisted that he call it War and Peace.
Elaine.
War, What Is It Good For? Absolutely nothing. Well, say it again. That's a song. They took it from Tolstoy.
No.
Three Films and a Podcast has no claim of ownership on any film footage used in this episode. All film footage is owned in its entirety by the copyright holders and is used solely with the intent of film criticism, commentary, and education under fair use law. And just like every car in Too Fast, Too Furious, this podcast contains spoilers. Enjoy. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Three Films and a Podcast, the show where three friends try to broaden each other's cinematic horizons through some themed rounds where we each pick a theme, I guess, for the round, and we each pick a movie that falls into that theme and just try to watch new stuff. And then we get here and we talk about it. So my name is Ben Lawhorn. I'm here in Salt Lake City. As always, I'm joined by Matt Weiler down in Pleasant Grove.
Howdy.
And Tyler Beck up in Portland, Oregon.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. So if you are new to the show, welcome, kind of explain what it's all about. We are trying to treat this podcast basically as a movie club where we all talk about movies together and we try to just discover new things and just not binge The Office, for the ninth time. We're just trying to explore some new stuff. So
it's an issue.
We started this in early, was it 2020? That's when we started this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just doing our movie club ourselves.
Yeah.
And our group text just got out of hand and we're like, you know what, let's just talk about this to each other and let's make it a podcast. So that's what you are listening to now, just this weird thing that evolved. So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. You can find all of our stuff on our website, www.threefilmspod.com. All of our social links are there. We have some Patreon stuff. We have a shop, whatever you want. Everything is there. And speaking of Patreons, and we are joined today by one of our longtime friends of the pod here. And I think, is this the third appearance?
This is my third appearance.
The third appearance, yes. We are joined today by Joshua Johnston here in Salt Lake.
What a do, mama.
I had the thought
I
earlier.
love it.
It's like, you know what I'm going to do? Is I'm going to be like, and joining us from the slums of Shaolin, the RZA, the Jizza. I want to go through It's like, I don't know how that would tie in at all, but maybe I'll do it next time you come on.
Josh has my new favorite hello. Matt usually has the crown, but Josh won this week.
All right.
Best hello.
Okay.
I still liked yours, Josh or Ben or Matt.
I
hated
really
Ben's.
Good. Get out of here with the Wu-Tang. Yeah, Josh, thank you so much for being here, joining us again. Like we talked about, this was the third time he's on. So if you want to hear his clubhouse questions like we do with all of our guests, you can find the video on YouTube, or you can go back and listen to the Gangster Movie Draft, which I would highly recommend anyway, because he answered all those questions there. So that was our first movie draft too. That was a lot of fun. I like that one. It was a good time.
Josh has been here for some milestones.
Yeah, right. We're just popping all of our cherries with Josh. This is great. So we are in the midst of our Kubrick round right now. Last week we talked about The Shining, which was, it was a great conversation. An excellent movie. I don't know how you haven't heard of that, if you haven't somehow. But this week we're on to my pick, and I went with the movie Paths of Glory, which you may not have heard of, which is totally understandable. It is a movie that I came across when I was trying to do that 500 movies in a year challenge. And one of them, I don't know if it was a Kubrick, I don't know what the qualifier was, but I ended up watching Paths of Glory and it just really stuck with me. We've adopted this thing here of our Rushmore Mountain where we pick our top 4 of something, which we'll get into later. And honestly, out of the 300, 400 movies I watched that year, this one would have made my Rushmore. This really had an impact on me. And there's something about the Douglas actors, because The Game would be on there too. That's a great movie. So, anyways, that's what we're at, I guess, is we're at Paths of Glory. We're in movie number 2 of our Kubrick round. Josh, do you want to give us a brief synopsis of the movie and kind of your history with the movie?
Yes. So this is
I'm just going to read IMDb, actually.
Do it.
Nope.
Um,
Get out of here. Cut.
Get out of here with that IMDb garbage. Written by Hugo with 2 G's. 1916, the trench warfare between French and Germans on the battlefield of France results in little advancements of troops on either side, each advancements in tens of meters rather than kilometers, but in many casualties. Thus, the request by French General Georges Broglie and his subordinate General Paul Murat to lead. God, too many French words, man.
Old Scarface.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a shit show. They're stuck in a hole. And the generals, they're getting ready to do some shifty stuff just to get accolades of the country. And because it's such a shit show, they want some of the people that are actually out in the field to kind of take the heat on why it's such a shit show.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the big court case ensues, and we see some great acting by Kirk Douglas, and he's taken us through this really ugly situation.
Yeah. He kind of feels like the one person with a conscience in this movie. It seems like
the one person in power
like,
with conscience.
Yes, that's totally fair. Like, we're gonna sacrifice bodies to boost morale. It's like, well, that's weird, but I don't know.
Yeah, and just really like trying to like, they're just trying to find a scapegoat for what's going on out there, and all these poor infantry, like it's a bad situation.
Yeah, and you had seen this before though, right? Because like I know you responded when we were putting it out there for people to be guests on. You wanted to come on this, so you had seen Paths of Glory before this, is that right?
I have seen the entire library of Kubrick. I was such a big fan. This was one of the movies that I was probably less familiar with. Like I hadn't rewatched it several times until we kind of started talking about it. I was like, God, this is a really great movie. Like,
yeah.
And you can kind of see like where Kubrick's really like coming into like, you can see his stamp all over this because of the way that a lot of the photography is laid out and stuff. I mean, because he, the first part of his young life, he was a photographer, and that was his main gig at Look magazine, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I mean, you can see that all over that. The kind of the cynicism that goes in a lot of Kubrick movies is definitely present in this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That questionable eye, as far as like the story is concerned. Never a straightforward story with Mr. Kubrick. So
Yeah.
Very true. And this felt like a good, like, we go from The Killing, which we've talked about before, which is like, I guess, lower level, smaller, scenes, kind of like not as epic. And then we go to this, which definitely has like the whole, like them going through all the trenches and things like that. And then his next movie is Spartacus, which he jumps up to. And that just goes to, does that still hold the record for like the most extras ever in a scene? I think
I read that somewhere as well too.
Yeah,
because
no
now we
idea.
just do it all digitally and we replace people. But I think at one point anyways, it held the record for the most extras. And Matt, I think you're the only one out of the three of us, Josh excluded, that has seen Spartacus. I'm curious, had you seen Paths of Glory before? What did you think about it? Like, what were your thoughts on this movie?
I hadn't seen it before, so this is my first path to glory.
Yeah.
No, it was, I mean, echoing Josh, it was great to see some of these Kubrickisms early on in his career, see some of these things that we've now seen in some of his later work, albeit underdeveloped. It's cool to see just this take. It's fun to have seen, war movies, at different points throughout my life, and then become somewhat familiar with a prolific filmmaker, and then go back and see what they did on an early war picture. And so that was definitely rewarding. And I just, anytime you have a movie about France and have French people in it with no actual French actors,
Yeah.
I'm on board.
A little tough.
Yes. I love it. That dude from The Killing who rolls down the windshield and shoots the horse, whatever. He's in this movie too. I was like, man, this is the most non-French person that's ever existed with this whatever New York accent.
Is he one of the soldiers that?
Yeah, he's one of the ones that's on trial that's crying the whole time.
Okay.
The priest.
Oh,
yeah.
So I looked him up. I read a Wikipedia thing about him. Apparently he faked his own kidnapping.
Yes. Oh yeah.
That's right.
That's amazing. How do you
incredible.
how do you even pull that off?
The movie, Kubrick was such a strict guy running the set that he just wouldn't let people leave, and people had to fake shit all the time to get out of filming stuff.
I thought that was one of the most coolest trivia things I saw on there, and that's why they couldn't get close-ups of everyone on the war, on the battlefield, and then when he's confessing to the priest, it's a stand-in, just in the shadows because he was gone. I was man, that's bad if you're faking your own kidnapping. Get out of there.
I just want to know how many adult men during that time were being kidnapped. How is that even a believable?
I have no idea.
Oh crap! What are we gonna do?
I'll never be able to prove it.
Yeah, I'll never know. This big 6'5" guy just gets kidnapped. Tyler, what did you think of the movie? Was this your first time seeing it too?
Yeah, it's my first time seeing it. I hadn't heard anything about it until it started to come up for the podcast. And I think my experience was the same as everyone on this podcast. I really liked it. I thought Kirk Douglas was fantastic. And he was easily my favorite part of the movie, which is sort of strange considering how much I enjoy Kubrick's work and how much, despite being early in his career, you can really see his thumbprint on it. Like Josh was saying, I really loved, the way he used the camera, and we'll talk about all that stuff later. But despite, you said, Tim Carey is the name of that actor that faked his own. Despite him being, you said he might be the least French person. I think Kirk Douglas might be the least French person.
Yeah,
he's
I think you're onto something.
They don't even try to French it up at all. Just
can you at least talk with a European accent, an English accent?
It's they're French. It's fine. They'll believe it. Yeah. It's no big deal.
Lieutenant Crochet, why are your men still in here?
It's impossible, sir. Major Vignon is dead.
Get these men out of the trenches! Come on! Let's get ready for another try! Get these men out of here!
I tried 3 times. Look at all the casualties.
All right! Let's give it another try! Come on! Let's give it another try!
It's Kirk Douglas. He's French. Believe it.
So
great actor.
Despite all of that, I mean, I understand the logistical challenge of the time, of making a movie where people actually sound French and selling it to Americans in the 50s. I understand why that's a tough sell, but it is still silly to watch. But despite all that, he was my favorite part of the movie. And I loved the Kubrick of it all. But and I also loved how succinct it all was, because we really deal with some pretty heavy, frankly, pretty disheartening stuff here, with class divides and power dynamics and the indifference in which these men are tossed to their, thrown to their deaths. Mm-hmm. And despite all that, we're in and out in 90 minutes, and I don't feel like anything was left on the table. I feel like we got everything we needed. I feel like it was thought-provoking. I feel like it's going to lead to a great conversation here on the podcast. And despite all that, it was tight. It was in and out. And so I really appreciated all of the decisions that the filmmaker here made. And when I say the filmmaker, I mean everyone, because obviously Kubrick directed it, but there's editing and there's different writing and there's decisions in the storytelling that need to be made that I'm sure Kubrick didn't dictate all of, you know what I mean? So
yeah, for sure.
Just as far as a package of a collective work of filmmakers, I just appreciated the fact that we're in and out. I feel like if this same movie was remade today, it would be at least 2 hours, at least. I just watched I just watched Jarhead. Alex and I watched it, not actually last week, so pretty recently. And, you know, it's a long movie and it drags a lot and it deals with some really heavy, weighty stuff around war and the dynamic of war and what it does to people and power dynamics and stuff. It's not a similar movie, but it's not totally dissimilar. And
would it have been better with Maggie Gyllenhaal in
it? Better, more interesting, maybe.
Thank you.
Better? I'm not sure. I actually thought about that. There's a lot of scenes in there that I'm like, Maggie being in this scene changes things quite a bit.
But I pose an interesting question. Have any of you guys seen a Maggie Gyllenhaal movie called Secretary?
I have not watched that. No.
With James Spader?
No.
Okay, so pretend Jake Gyllenhaal is her character in that. Watch the movie and then we'll talk about swapping.
Well, I don't think it goes backwards. I think it only goes Maggie replacing Jake, right, Matt? Is that the theory?
I think both are interesting, but yeah, I believe that there's, and this is not throwing shade at Jake Gyllenhaal. I'm just saying that every single role that he's in might be better with Maggie.
I would actually like to see her do Jarhead. There's some scenes in there that if she could pull it off, she probably could. But all that to say, like, I really enjoyed it. I wrote in my Letterboxd review, I'm not sure how many more times I'll watch it, but now that I think about it, I don't know how true that is. I could see myself watching this again. About
Paths of Glory or Jarhead?
Paths of Glory.
Okay, yeah.
It's a lean watch, like you said. It's only 90 minutes.
Yeah,
and there's no real fat to this movie. Like, it's all like, there's not like extra shit that
it's very lean.
You really need to throw away.
But it's like it's a good lean. There's a lot of meat on the bone, but it's just like
totally.
But go ahead, Ben.
No, please.
I don't know where I was gonna go, so save me from myself.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say, like, I'm with you 100%. And that's why, like, I cheated this round and picked something that I had already seen because I wanted us all to watch it. And I wanted an excuse to watch it again because, like, again, I did watch it, like, whatever that was, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And I loved it. And I have not watched it since. But, like, I've wanted to, but it's just like, I just haven't had the desire. Like, let me sit down and put on Paths of Glory. Yeah. But this, like, for so many things for this podcast, it then becomes like a reason to like take the time and sit down and watch something. So that's why, showing my cards, I just completely went against the grain on what we're supposed to be doing here. And I was like, no, I want to watch it again. So we're going to watch it again. But it was fun. Like, I forgot how it ended. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, man, are they going to be saved or like what's going to happen? And so it was still a great payoff. It just like, it reminded me why I enjoyed it so much the first time.
Yeah.
And speaking of, like, I guess I just want to get into like the war movie genre, like it is so beloved in the industry. It seems like if there's ever a war movie that's up for best picture, it's going to take it, or like best actor, anything like that. Like if you get the Saving Private Ryan's or, 1917, a couple of years ago, a lot of that was a cinematography too, which is really cool. A lot of similarities between these two. I don't know if any of you guys have seen 1917, but all the like walking through the trenches. I'm like, there's no way that those guys did not watch Paths of Glory because this is like the exact same shot, which is really cool. It's great to like pay tribute to it. But I guess I just wanted to like talk about that. Like what are your thoughts on why we love war movies? We, being like the Academy and the country and stuff. And how did you guys feel about how it got portrayed in this movie? Josh, I'll throw it to you. What are your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, I really like some of my most favorite movies are war movies. And I feel like what makes the movies so great for me is that they have these heavy questions, like they kind of prove the ugliness of war.
Yeah.
They have these deeper questions that it's just not straightforward. We're doing this for democracy. We're doing this for any of these patriotic things. It has a lot to do with some of those same things that they have in Paths of Glory. And then you get, really twisted like Apocalypse Now, where it kind of gets psychedelic at times. And and then you can go really have some fun with it a little bit, like Jojo Rabbit and Inglourious Bastards. but I think to have a really good war movie, you got to have those important questions. What is war good for? You know, you got to ask
nothing.
Well, it's good for good movies.
It's true.
That's what Tower of Power said.
What are your thoughts, Tyler?
I was gonna say essentially the same thing. I just think, despite the fact that the vast majority of people will never know what it's like to be in an actual war, in the sense of like in the trenches shooting against the enemy, we can all sort of relate to the themes, and it's easy to pack different themes into a war movie. Like, you know, speaking about Jarhead, that's about essentially it's about the lack of conflict, and it's about the machismo of the military and like the lack of humanity that way. Or, you know, there's movies where it's about the brotherhood of war and the extent of humanity, or the true beauty of it, you know, the way you can connect to people. And I think, like, you know, not to sound like too, you know, I like to say words I don't know the meaning of, but not to sound like too esoteric. I don't know if that's the right word, or like too lofty or hyperbolic, but like, you know, life can feel a lot like a war at times, you know, just getting out of bed and dealing with the shit you have to do. So I feel like we just naturally gravitate towards stories of conflict because it reflects our own lives. And frankly, like, everything we have as people, no matter what country you're in, let's just say Americans, because the four of us happen to be Americans, like there's a history of war throughout our history, both the history that we've experienced and the history that we've been taught. Josh, your wife is from Mexico. Like,
she's seen people gunned down in the street.
Right. Like, she's seen true conflict. And like, there's a show, you know, that show is Silicon Valley. There's a quote that just popped into my head and said, from Guilfoyle, it says, "The history of humanity is a book written in blood. We're all just animals in a pit." And like, you know, that's a very cynical way to view life, but it really is true, man. Like, when it comes down to it, we're all just animals, like, trying to fight for a better life for ourselves. So I think it's easy to see yourself in these situations and in these stories. And I do think there is a little bit of like hero fantasy in it, you know, like, you want to think like, what would I do in this situation, and how would I react, and what would this actually be like? And it's something that the actual warfare is something that most people luckily don't have to experience. And so it's just interesting to see. And it's something it's relatable because, you know, life is in and of itself a war against itself. Like, it's you against the world, essentially. But also it's like, you know, there's just that curiosity, that morbid curiosity of the conflict and what it all means. So I just think it's an easy genre to shoehorn a lot of different weight into, and a lot of different themes and a lot of different talking points.
No, I mean, that's a great point. And we talked about the Academy loving war movies, but I almost wonder, since this one wasn't on U.S. soil or really with any Americans, like, it didn't get nominated for anything at all.
Which is like, crazy.
It's so weird to me that it didn't get even nominated for anything. Like, like, this was great, you know?
Okay, so while you're talking, I can look this up.
Gigi won Best Picture. I forget what. Yeah, you can look it up and see. But anyways, I was just like surprised this didn't get any recognition at all. Like, it's obviously, I thought it was a great movie. Matt, what are your thoughts on the war genre and why we love it so much?
So it is interesting. I feel like, I mean, war is like, it's that universal ugly thing that pretty much everybody can agree. Everyone in the world can agree that it's not, you know, a good situation. And so there is like some type of intrigue to it. I will say, I feel like it was just in the American life, it was just like, for us, we've been lucky enough to not have like our lives dominated by war, but like my dad had a draft number. His dad served in World War II. You know, my great grandpa was served in World War II. So like, we're just a couple generations detached from war dominating, you know, everything about life and society. And I think they really love war movies. Like my dad loves war movies. And I swear every time I go to his house, there's like some obscure war movie that he has from the library. And he's just constantly like, he just has this library of war movies in his head. And I think it's because it's sensationalized in a way. I think there's some folk story like heroics that they really connect to because of their upbringing. And part of that, you know, seeps into the Academy. You know, like a lot of these Academy members grew up during that time, had it close to them. And then, you know,
and are still there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then the industry grew around it, you know, like you have these war movies that came out shortly around the wartime that are inspiring other things like Star Wars. You know, one of my favorites is, you know, George Lucas took clips from war movies and basically just made a sci-fi version of it. So it touches everything. I'm not the biggest fan of war movies as a genre. I certainly like them when I watch them and I enjoy them. Like the really good ones, I enjoy just as much as anybody else, but it's not like I'd never sit down to watch a war movie really.
Yeah.
But I think they, like Josh and Tyler already said, like they give you a view of humanity and a lot of difficult questions that as good of a guy as you think you are, these answers aren't easy. And you can come to a conclusion that you have peace with. But it's usually choosing two really bad situations. And so that's just the nature of war. And I think at the end of the day, it just forces you to reflect. And sometimes you walk out of a war movie and you're like, oh, I feel really good about where things are right now compared to that. Sometimes you feel like, oh man, we're bad guys. And then sometimes you just feel like, oh, we have a long way to go. And I think it's interesting that those movies bring that out.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to see how they've like evolved over time too, because especially in this movie, you know, it's like, oh, he has shell shock and the guy's like, that's not a real thing. Like, get over it, whatever. But now we have movies that like are specifically about soldiers dealing with their PTSD. You know, we talk about, we'll get into some of those movies. We talk about like Hurt Locker and things like that. It's just like, what did these guys go through? You know, a lot of that was like those Vietnam War movies. You know, if you get into Platoon or, you know, speaking of Kubrick, Full Metal Jacket, things like that, like the way that they have to experience this. I think for most of us, like for the four of us anyway, I think the one, like the war, I guess that was maybe wrapping up or whatever was the Gulf War. I remember people like coming home when I was a kid or whatever from that.
Yeah.
And then 9/11 happened, you know, like we had I'm sure there were wars going on, but I think we had like a quite a while there without a war, so to speak, happening. And then after 9/11, it just feels like it hasn't stopped. You know, it's been nonstop for 20 years now that we've been dealing with it. And I don't know when it will ever stop because, you know, we don't need to get into the politics of it, but it's a money making machine, unfortunately, for some people. So it's that I think it's interesting to see all the dynamics now and just how some of the behaviors of people in this movie, you know, like it's like, oh yeah, we've got to kill these people. And the next scene is them like just dancing at a formal ball. It's like, yeah, these guys don't give a shit. Like they're fine. Like they're not going to die. It's like
the most shocking scene for me.
Just that hard cut to them like dancing and partying and stuff. I'm like, oh man, these people don't care at all.
Didn't mean anything to them.
No. And it's just like, I mean, it gave me the thought of, I think it's from Fahrenheit 9/11 when Michael Moore sends like draft papers to like congressmen's, like he you know, approaches them with it like, oh, do you want to sign up your kid for the war? And they're like, well, no, I don't want to do that. It's like, yeah, because you don't want to sacrifice people that you know, but if you don't know these people, you're more than willing to just like send them off into this meaningless war. So I don't know. That's a really big side tangent that we don't need to go down, but I just think it's interesting, like how much of a influence it has on our culture and our society. You know, and just like, yeah, the way we perceive things and the way it turns into patriotism for better or worse. But to go a little bit more lighthearted, I want to talk about Kubrick now. It's like smooth transition into camera work here. But I think you guys are right. Like I had put down in a note later on that this is the most non-Kubrick film for me. Obviously, I agree. Like I haven't seen Lolita. I haven't seen Spartacus. Like I haven't seen everything, but from the other movies, I feel like I can make ties to them. Whereas this one is just like, man, this one is really just like out of left field. I still love it. It's a great movie, obviously, but I'm like, man, I wouldn't ever guess that this was a Kubrick movie. But I think the one place that we do see it, you guys mentioned, is kind of in the camera work. Like he's always been great with the camera. Some of the stuff I wanted to talk about or just mention is like, again, those shots like from 1917, where we're just like walking through the trenches with the colonel or whoever, you know, the guys are just standing there like huddled, just scared to go up, as you would be. Just we get down there with them, or at the ball, like we're just like, it's almost like we're floating with the people as they're dancing and doing their waltz and stuff, and we're just kind of like in there with them. And then the guys approaching the anthill, like just these really wide shots, just watching all these people just like charge. And I don't know, the other one that really stuck out to me is during the court scene, where Colonel Dax like gets up and we're behind the guys who are on trial, but we're just like moving with him, you know, as he goes like paces left and right. I'm like, man, this is really cool the way that I love his camera work. I think it's a no duh statement, you know, but he's always just been really good with this and letting us feel like we're there, like we're observing with them, you know, which is, I don't know, you could do a static shot, you could just do over the shoulder, but he always has something to do with the camera. I kind of just want to get your guys' your general thoughts on his camera work, and like in this, how does this movie tie into the other Kubrick stuff that you've seen? And as our resident Kubrick fan and genius, I'm going to throw it to you, Josh, and just kind of see like, I'm grateful to hear that you would kind of agree with me. This is like the least Kubrick. And I just kind of wanted to like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, yeah, just kind of go into that.
Like I kind of stated up front is, I think because he was relatively new to doing like feature length films at that time, and having a big actor like Kirk Douglas involved, there are some things in there that are very Kubrickian.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Kubrick-esque.
Kubrick-esque. Kubricky.
I like Kubrick.
You know, definitely when we're going through the trenches and then those over the shoulder shots like you're talking about. But I think as time goes on with his movies, you definitely see a more stylized Kubrick. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at anything after, you know, like Clockwork Orange, like he has, you know, people doing the Kubrick stare, you know, where they get down like that and they're. But yeah, this one definitely is a little more lighter on the Kubrick stylized camera work. Still amazing. And like I said, and I think this movie is probably, you know, echoing what we were saying earlier about this being like a very lean movie. This is probably one of his leanest movies as far as like what's going on. Like there's not like it's not very common to see a 90-minute Kubrick film. Like he really builds that suspense. Like he really leans into that in his later career.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Matt?
From what I guess taking from what I've seen of Kubrick's movies, what I was able to notice in this one is early on he makes the camera as big of a star in the movie as, you know, the biggest stars that he has. Yeah. Like the camera is as important to him as anybody there. Mm-hmm. And there were like fewer shots where I'm like, oh, that's a Kubrick shot. But like some of these shots that he was making, it's like, how many war movies? Like I'd love to watch the war movies around that time just to see like what he's bringing to the genre here in this movie. Because it feels like just because we've seen his other work, like it seems like, okay, it's safe to say that some of these panning shots and some of these wide shots are like definitely him. Mm-hmm. I'm not familiar enough with like the industry during that time. But there's that one scene like right before the soldiers are about to be fired on, where it shows like the 3 posts and he's got it framed perfectly. I'm like, okay, this is a Kubrick shot. Yeah. And then it's got like that sort of procession where it's panning across and it shows like Kirk Douglas like follow the camera with his eyes. Like
those
he's just
shots
like,
are so cool.
What? So cool. And just that perspective was nice to pull out from there. Some other things, it seems, at least with my experience with Kubrick, that he's big on face acting, and some of those shots of up close in their face, and in a lot of cases, just wild eyes. Like he's getting these.
That Kubrick stare, man.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's definitely present here. And then this is just, again, something that I've noticed in his movies. I don't know in 1957 if this was the case or how much control he had over some of the sets here. But in a lot of the discussions with the higher ups in the military, they're in like this sort of palace setting, and there's paintings that are in the backdrop of some of these conversations. And I'm not an art history whiz, but I would love to identify some of those pieces just to see if they provide any context to the conversation that's going on there, because certainly later in his career, that's something Kubrick would have thrown in there. I'm not sure if at this point he would have thrown in, a piece that speaks perfectly to what the scene is, but I would be very interested in finding out.
Yeah, I'm not sure he might not have had the budget for that, but who knows, man? Like, speaking of camera work and budget, like the fact that he was able to do some of the things with the camera that he was able to do, like when you say floating through the ballroom, like that's a shot that's difficult to do now with electronic gimbals and tiny lightweight cameras. I mean, the cameras that he was using and the technology behind it, and the fact that he was able to get the smooth motion and that floating feel, like the camera feels light. You know what I mean?
Does,
and when you're floating backwards through the trenches, like that had to have been so expensive and cost prohibitive. I mean, just building the trench and having all the extras and having the camera. So it's possible, Matt, that maybe he was able to like put that stuff in, because knowing Kubrick, again, like with the qualifier, as much as I know his work, I haven't seen all of his stuff, but now I have seen some more stuff, thankfully. But it wouldn't surprise me if he had changed some of the paintings in the backdrop. It's a good observation that I didn't make. And to me, when you guys said it's the least Kubrick of his films, I don't know if I can see what you're saying, but I'm not sure I totally agree. I think for me, The Killing is the least Kubrick of the Kubrick movies. And to be honest, like outside of like Wes Anderson and maybe like a Taika movie, I'm not sure I could look at a movie and say, oh, this was directed by so-and-so. Right. I'd like to think I would know a Spielberg movie, but to be honest, like a lot of times I think Apollo 13 was a Spielberg movie. You know what I mean? And, I think Ron Howard probably pulled a lot from Spielberg to make that movie. But all I'm trying to say is like, I definitely saw the Kubrick in here, but it definitely seemed like an adolescent Kubrick or like a sophomoric Kubrick. You know what I mean? Like he was sort of finding his way. Because when I think of a Kubrick film, the thing I always think of is the space that the movie lives in, and the production design and the world building. Like, I'm sure that they didn't go out to a field and build trenches. I'm sure it was plywood walls made to look like trenches, right? I mean, who knows? Honestly, who knows? But like every time you're in a Kubrick film, and every set you're in and every world you're in, it feels like you're in that world. Like it feels very lived in. It feels very real. When we're in, I can't remember his name, but Kirk Douglas's little bunker, his little apartment, Colonel Dax, his little apartment in the bunker. Like it felt like that guy had been living there for years. It felt authentic. It felt real. And like, to me, when I think of Kubrick, that's what I think of. Like the Space Odyssey 2001, it's like that spaceship feels real. It's like, it's both sharp and metallic, but like dirty and lived in at the same time. Like it has that otherworldly but lived in feel to it. And The Shining, like I thought they filmed it in the hotel. I learned to record an episode that they didn't actually film that movie in the Overlook Hotel or whatever it's called in Colorado. So while I can understand why it might not be the most Kubricky of films, to me, it's like all the foundations are there, right?
Yeah.
And I just love, the last thing I'll say about his camera work is, I mentioned space before. Like he has a way of like working with the space and making it feel, you feel the space that the camera is in. Right. And I don't really know a better way to articulate that or to describe it, but like with the, it just feels authentic, and the worlds feel real, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And so I just appreciate his use of space. Like if it's a tight room, it feels tight. If it's a big room, it feels big. And I mean, obviously just what we see can inform the way we feel about the space the camera's in, but there's just a way that he can move the camera, a lot like Josh was saying. And I think, Ben, you mentioned being in the ballroom and it pans behind the people, like that gives you a sense of depth, and it gives you a sense of place in the scene, and it builds that space and that depth. And it's just something that he just obviously has a keen talent for, because he's been doing it since he started, So
yeah. And I think
that photography background definitely plays a part in
for sure
what he was doing visually that whole time. And yeah, when you said the killing, I was like, oh yeah, that's obviously like he impacted directors far beyond with that movie, up to Tarantino and anyone that's making a heist movie now, the timing especially. But yeah, I think I might agree with you there a little bit, Tyler. Like I think that definitely ranks up there high with what you automatically think for Kubrick. I mean, I think a lot of people think of The Shining and Clockwork Orange and those movies, and just how stylized those ones are, and the horror that's going on in the storytelling.
Yeah.
In 2001, same thing. It's like that world building that you're talking about. Yeah, definitely is what comes to mind. I feel like when you say this is a Kubrick film, this is what you can expect most of the time.
Right.
Yeah. I think his use of space it's a great point there. And even, during the trial, again, when we're behind the people who are, on trial, he sounds like he's 40 feet away, like we're not getting like really clear audio.
Yes, I protest against being prevented from introducing evidence that I consider vital to the defense.
But I think it's great because, again, it makes us feel like we're at a distance. And when we first meet Colonel Dax in his little bunker thing, I mean, they have to Matt could not stand up in that place. Like, it's just like so cramped. Like they have to like kind of bend down as they come in. And then he goes to the palace where there's like 30-foot ceilings and just like all this like pomp and all this stuff. You know what I mean? It's like, man, these really just show the two different sides of the war here. It's really interesting to use the locations to really influence like what these people are experiencing. And the fact that he did all less than $1 million budget, and 30% of that went to Kirk Douglas. So he really had like a $700,000 budget, for that whole movie, actors, production, all that stuff. And
worth it. Kirk was incredible.
He didn't take a salary. I think he just took like percentage or something, but still, I mean, it's amazing what he did.
He was, cause I think we'll talk about Kirk later, but he was nominated for a different picture. He was nominated for Lust for Life in this same year. Yeah. At least
Iggy Pop song.
Yeah. But yeah, like you said, Paths of Glory, I did look it up. It wasn't nominated for anything, but it looks like Kirk Douglas was in another movie that was nominated.
Okay.
And unless I have the wrong year here, it looks like Around the World in 80 Days won.
Okay.
The year that passed.
Well, they only had like 6 actors back then, so
right.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, he was up against some good. He was up against James Dean and Rock Hudson, Laurence Olivier, as far as actors are concerned. It's not like, it seems like at least, it didn't go to like some unworthy
as
winner.
TLC would say, there's no scrubs.
That's right. But it is strange because, maybe it's just the way that I look at old movies, right? Like, in my ignorance, it feels like they don't deal with as much weighty subject matter It just feels like they were simple stories told with simple technology, which I'm learning is, and I've always sort of known wasn't the case. But it's just interesting that a movie like this that's dealing with the things that it's dealing with and the time that it was dealing with it, it's like, maybe that's why it didn't get nominated. I don't know. 'Cause maybe it was a little bit too much, but that's a sidebar that I didn't anticipate, but
no, again, and like I'm curious how much of an influence of it not being an American war, played, like it's just like it's not home turf,
like
so it's like
French.
We don't care. And honestly, I don't think I picked up on that the first time I watched it. I think I assumed that it was like Americans helping out the French. And then watching this time, I was like, wait, Kirk Douglas is supposed to be French in this? Like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, I was just getting lost in his like chin dimple, but I was just like, this dude is not French at all. There's no way.
That Douglas gene is strong, my man.
Man, no kidding. I hope we get around to the game at some point. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it, but man, it's so good. Well, I want to go over some of our personal winners here. It's been a while since we've had a Rushmore on the pod, and I've missed it, so I wanted to do one. I was reading Roger Ebert's review of Paths of Glory, and he interviewed Kirk Douglas in 1969. And Douglas, felt that he said that he was at like the summit, like the peak of his acting career during this movie. And he's quoted as saying, "There's a picture that will always be good years from now. I don't have to wait 50 years to know that. I know it now." I'm like, man, that's super cool to have that confidence in this movie. And I think he's 100% correct, for the record, like I'm on board with that, but how refreshing and just like amazing must that be as an actor to know, like I was part of something that I will be proud of forever. Like it's going to be a good movie as long as I live and even after that. And I couldn't agree more with Kirk Douglas on that. But that I wanted to like lead into our personal like war movie Rushmore Mountains. I want to know what some of our favorites are. Josh, I want to kick it to you to know like what 4 war movies make your Rushmore.
These are OR scrubs. Oh, are they?
This is hard. I mean, there are a lot of those that I enjoy, and it's weird to say like what war like what you were saying, Matt, like I don't know if I necessarily love war movies. Like, it's like that's a hard question. Like the movies I love, but it's like like we were just talking about, war is an ugly thing. But I would have to say, one of my tops is Apocalypse Now, and in a lot of ways, like it asks some of these similar questions.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, just a masterpiece and quite psychedelic without resorting to like different techniques that we have now. Just that journey down the river and all the drama that they made that movie in a mini war itself. And then I've got another Kubrick film on my list, Dr. Strangelove.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Nice.
It's one of my favorite war movies. Again, coming with the heavy questions.
I still need to see that
Peter
one.
Sellers. Oh
So
man,
good.
you'll love it. You'll see it early. James Earl Jones.
I try to save some movies that I know we'll talk about later on the pod for the pod, but I think that one might be one that sneaks into my eyeballs before we can talk about it on a pod.
I mean, you get to see Peter Sellers play 3 different characters. You get, Sterling Hayden again. You get, just Slim Pickens.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of great acting and comedic acting there. And actually there's it seems like a lot of Kubrick's shots were taken a lot in later movies. We were talking about the trenches and stuff. But Dr. Strangelove, like I saw a lot of shots that were used kind of in Saving Private Ryan too. So I mean, just that as a whole, I really like. These next 2 are tough. Because I was gonna say Full Metal Jacket, but no, it's that in between that and Inglourious Bastards. So I guess I'll say Inglourious Bastards.
Each and every man under my command owes me 100 Nazi scalps. And I want my scalps. And all y'all will get me 100 Nazi scalps, taken from the heads of 100 dead Nazis. Or you will die trying.
Nice.
And then I'll say Jojo Rabbit.
Nice.
That's beautiful.
Get my Taika Waititi in there.
Got to do it.
Yeah,
I love it.
When I put together my list, I wish I had thought of Jojo Rabbit. I guess like I just didn't think of that as a war movie, but it totally is. I guess I just thought of it as more of a Taika movie, if anything, you know what I mean? But that's a great pick. I'll leave it off my list because I want to be genuine with the things I thought about. The first movie I thought of was Tropic Thunder.
God damn it! We lost! We fucking super lost, man! Tell them, McCluskey. Tell them what time it is.
I don't believe you people.
Huh? What do you mean, you people?
What do you mean, you people?
Huh?
Like if I'm gonna watch a movie about war, that's probably the first one I would put on. Because, I don't think any of us here are like necessarily war movie buffs. You know what I mean? I certainly have enjoyed
it's
some.
for Tom Cruise mainly though.
Yeah. And then next up would be Inglourious Bastards. Honestly, just the first 10, 15 minutes or whatever where we meet in the it's a French guy. It ties into the episode. We meet Hans Landa and the whole
amazing
the rats beneath the floor thing. And then the next movie I thought of was the Pianist. I've only seen that once, but it really stuck with me. And I haven't watched it since, but it's one when I see it, I'm like, oh yeah, I should watch that, but I just don't want to right now. So I'll take The Pianist. And then the fourth is a movie that we've talked about on this podcast, and I discovered with this podcast, Dunkirk from Chris Nolan. And with every Rushmore Mountain, this is like with the qualifier that of movies that I've seen, these are my four favorite I guess I should say that the first four that popped in my head. That's always how I make these lists, because I thought about Apocalypse Now and Platoon, but if I'm being genuine, these are the first ones that popped in my head. So I'll go with those four: Tropic Thunder, Inglourious Bastards, The Pianist, and Dunkirk.
Cool. Matthew.
Well,
the time is yours.
Got to kick mine off with Saving Private Ryan.
Yep.
Not much else to say there.
I do
just the one clip where Matt Damon ages, right? It's just that on the that's all you want. It's like, oh, I'm getting old.
It was hard not to compare the opening sequence of Saving Private Ryan, the storming of D-Day and the storming of Normandy, the beaches of Normandy, and then the taking of Ant Hill. And it made me really think why Saving Private Ryan was so traumatic for a lot of soldiers, because the scenes are essentially the exact same, right? Yeah. It's men just running towards their death, but the difference in reality and realism and production value is so different. I was like, okay, I always knew why it was traumatic, but it never really occurred to me that this was the first, like, we've seen this scene before, I guess is what I'm saying. But Saving Private Ryan was the first time where it was like, oh shit, like this looks and feels real. Because we see people get gunned down, storming Ant Hill, but they get gunned down, they just fall over, right? Or like a bomb explodes near them and they're just dead. But like with Saving Private Ryan, we did we get one? A Wilhelm scream?
I don't think so.
Oh gosh, I wish. But yeah, Saving Private Ryan, that's a good point. Like you feel the artillery, you feel like you're there, and it's just that opening sequence alone is worthy of a Rushmore. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Matt, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Oh yeah, it is interesting to compare them. Saving Private Ryan just seems to be like the quintessential war movie for whatever reason in my mind. Like it's always the first one that comes up in my mind. My second one would be Rogue One. Star Wars, got to have a Star Wars movie in there.
Love it.
That's like the main Star Wars movie outside of the space fighting. That it feels like an actual war like the beach and stuff. And
it was close between this and Attack of the Clones, you know.
Guys, we have a surprise guest.
Coin flip here.
True, yeah, I guess, yeah, true.
Jasper decided he wanted to come over and talk about Rogue One. He heard
what's up, dog?
I love it.
It's his first appearance on the pod.
All right.
Nice.
He's going to be hanging out with us the rest of the time.
I love
Awesome.
Anyway, sorry.
And then this last year, I watched The Five Bloods.
Yeah.
It was good. It was a
good
view
one.
of the Vietnam War that I hadn't really seen before, and so it was cool.
I still
to
need to see that.
check that out. Chadwick, being Chadwick, really great role for him. Super cool, super interesting story. I don't know if there's another war movie where I can think where everybody knows a character's name from it, and that's Forrest Gump. Everybody knows Lieutenant Dan.
Oh yeah.
Lieutenant Dan, I got you some ice cream. Lieutenant Dan, ice cream.
That's a good point.
Yep.
Is it a war movie? I'm not going to take it from you. If you view it as a
Lieutenant
war
Dan.
movie,
Name a character from another war movie that
Lieutenant
everybody knows.
that is true. I mean,
Saves
that's a
all
good
those
point.
people.
Like when you think, I don't know if it's a war movie, but the war stuff in Forrest Gump is so prevalent that I think it is worthy of being on a Rushmore. I just wouldn't have thought. I just never would have thought of it. And I guess it's one of my
If you
favorite
take the war
things.
out, do you have the same movie?
Well, no.
You don't have
Yeah,
Yeah,
Bubba.
Forrest Gump
you don't
is
have
in
Lieutenant Dan.
chapters.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Forrest
and-
Gump is many movies.
I just
in one.
like
Yeah,
it's
that's
one of my
true.
favorite things about doing this podcast. I guess even
Controversy.
well, not even controversy, but just the different way we look at stuff. And I just always
yeah.
I just always appreciate Matt's perspective on things, because I never would have thought of Forrest Gump as a war movie, and I don't even know if I still do. But you're right. Like that's probably the most important story in the movie. It's the most formative for Forrest, I think. All the time he spends in the war and the relationship he forms with Lieutenant Dan. So yeah, no, I love the way Matt's brain works, and despite the fact that I constantly
there's our
interrupt him.
Well, I'm excited what you have to say about my pick, because the first one I thought of too was Inglourious Bastards. I still to this day think it's Tarantino's best movie, like front to back. I think it's like the best thing he's done. I love Inglourious Bastards. I'll throw Paths of Glory on there because it's the reason I picked this. I still think it's just one of the better war movies that has existed.
Yeah.
I'm going back and forth between two, and since Josh said one, I'll say the other. I'll go with Platoon. Tyler, I think you and I watched this when we were doing our version of this years ago.
Yeah.
We watched Platoon because I just remember some of those scenes were just like, man, the camera work in that movie was fantastic. The other one I was going between is Apocalypse Now, which is obviously it's a classic, but I'll go with Platoon. And then, my fourth pick is going to be one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Casablanca. It's not a war movie necessarily, but the whole movie takes place during and because of a war. I think the way Matt put it is great. It's like, if you take the war out of it, is it the same movie? No, like there's no drama, there's no controversy, there's no nothing, it's like the whole movie is revolving around a war. So I'm going to sneak that in as my fourth pick as a war movie. So I think we covered some really great movies though. I think that was awesome. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about that we somehow haven't on Paths of Glory yet?
I definitely, I don't know if we need to like talk about it, but we just need to mention the way this movie ends, the actual ending, the last scene that we see.
Yeah.
I think, despite everything that we said about this movie and the fact I really enjoyed it before the way this movie ends, but I think it was, when I really think about it, it was the best thing in this movie, despite like how truly difficult it was to watch, for the listeners, if you haven't seen this movie, obviously we're about to spoil the ending. It doesn't really necessarily change what happens, but it definitely, I don't know. It was very impactful. And I just like, it's what sticks with me the most besides Kirk Douglas and his beautiful chin dimple. Just the way that the just I don't know. It was just a beautiful. It's weird to call it beautiful because, you know, we're talking about the misogyny of these soldiers and the overly macho and testosterone fueled way in which they treat this woman who's clearly being trafficked. You know, like she is a prisoner of war. That was
actually Kubrick's wife too.
Was it really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
he married her
one of his wives.
This.
Wow.
Yeah.
But it was just, despite all, like, you know, so what it is the men are all at a bar, sort of getting their one day of rest or whatever it is. And they put this poor German woman who's clearly a prisoner of war, been, you know, taken captive. And she sings a song to the soldiers who are catcalling her. And as she sings, it's sort of like, you can see it in their faces and you can see it. Like, it just like, they all sort of realize like, oh, what are we doing? You know what I mean? It just like, I guess to me, it just like drove the nail home of like what I just said, like, what are we doing with it? Like, what is war good for? You know what I mean? Like,
that's what she was actually singing in German.
Yeah, I mean, it really drove home the humanity of these people. You know, they go from being like animals and just like catcalling and whistling, like, oh, girl, oh my God. Like, they're just like freaking out. Just suddenly it's like, oh, wait, I kind of recognize this. And they all just like, none of them know the words because in German, but they must recognize it just from hearing. And they're all just like humming along.
Yeah.
And it's actually that scene that made me think of Casablanca, because that's Steven Spielberg's favorite scene of all time is in Casablanca, when the two like groups of the military guys are battling back and forth singing their national anthems. You know, that's his favorite scene of all time. And I got thinking about that watching the end of this. I'm like, oh, it's kind of interesting, the humanity or like the connection we make with people when they're able to like tap into, I don't know, just who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. I think that's what we got to see here. And then, like you said, like the ending after that, where it's just like, we have to go to the front of the line now. He's like, just give them a couple more minutes, like let them enjoy this. Cause unfortunately for some of these people, this is the last moments they're going to have, you know, so like, let's just let them have this. And I think it was a powerful ending. I'm glad you brought that up, because it was definitely something I wanted to talk about. I think it ended really well. It was a great note, and goes back to the duality of the Colonel Dax character of like wanting to do what's right, but also knowing like what's inevitable and what he has to do. So, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. I know you've got this will come out much after we got the May the 4th gallery going on right now, but you want to tell people where they can find you to look to, you know, get some of your art or anything like that? Do you want to throw out your plug? Yeah.
So just the Instagram account as of now, JLJ Art Works, WORX. You can find me online there. Send me a DM if you want a painting or a print.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Proud owner of one of those. Highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll make sure we get all the links and stuff put in here. Matt, Tyler, thank you for joining once again. This was super fun. Man. I'm glad we all had a good experience with this movie. I'm excited. Next week, we're continuing Kubrick. We're wrapping it up with Barry Lyndon, which I believe is new to all three of us. So this will be the first Kubrick movie that none of us have seen before. So
and I think it's one, speaking personally, that I don't think I would have ever watched naturally. I think I would have watched Strangelove and Clockwork Orange and all these things, but I probably wouldn't. Anyways,
sorry,
I'm
Tyler.
Excited. I'm very excited.
Sorry.
No, Matt, I already told you I love your perspective and I love your influence on this podcast. And I'm very excited that you picked this, because I really don't think I would have watched it, and I already know I'm going to enjoy it. So
yeah, it's going to be awesome. Yeah.
At least we'll enjoy discussing it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's going to be good.
And I'll enjoy hearing it.
You'll enjoy us.
Well, hopefully so do our listeners.
Yes. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening and following along with us. Again, you can find all of our stuff at our website, 3filmspod.com. All of our socials on there, the Patreon, all that kind of stuff. We'll have more things coming up. We had an in-person patron watch party a little while ago, which was an absolute blast. So I'm sure we'll be doing more of those in the future. But yeah, thanks again, everyone, for your support. If you can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, that's like the number one thing you could do for us to help other people that like movie podcasts help them find us. That'd be the biggest thing you could do for us. So thank you
Buy
again.
the gear.
Buy
the gear.
Look at that shirt. Look at that patron shirt. I love it. So
great.
Thank you, everyone. Look forward to hearing from you, and we will see you guys next week.
See ya.
Thanks for having me on again, guys.
Of course.
Anyway, like I was saying, shrimp is the fruit of the sea. You can barbecue it, boil it, broil it, bake it, saute it. There's shrimp kebabs, shrimp creole, shrimp gumbo, pan fried, deep fried, stir fried. There's pineapple shrimp, lemon shrimp, coconut shrimp, pepper shrimp, shrimp soup, shrimp stew, shrimp salad, shrimp and potatoes, shrimp burger, shrimp sandwich. That's about it.